we are getting alarming reports of atrocities against civilians, including women and children in eastern Aleppo. We have collectively failed the people of Syria.
Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. From siege to slaughter to silence, Bashar al Assad's regime has retaken Aleppo after years of fighting with rebels. The end came swiftly and brutally. For 4 weeks, the regime's rapid advance on Syria's largest city choked opposition territory down to a small shred of land. At the 11th hour, Turkey and Russia brokered a ceasefire and a plan to evacuate residents. Just hours before, there had been reports of atrocities at the hands of the regime, from mass killings to door-to-door murders. The world reacted with shock and outrage. The resounding question, how did we allow this to happen? The United Nations had no answer. Ban Ki-moon acknowledged the UN had failed, saying history will not easily absolve us. Today's Newsmaker is Aleppo, as we ask if the defeat there is the nail in the coffin for the Syrian opposition.
The exodus, after years of fighting and months of living under siege. Aleppo's rebel-held areas have fallen into the hands of the Syrian regime.
What in these hours looked like a complete meltdown of humanity.
The UN says 82 people, including children, were executed by pro-government forces as they tried to escape. At least 37,000 civilians have fled in the last week. And about 6,000 men have been forced to join the Syrian army after fleeing to government areas. Rebel territory in eastern Aleppo has been shrinking for weeks as the regime pounded the area, further destroying parts of the divided city. On Tuesday, a deal was reached. Turkey and Russia brokered a ceasefire with rebel groups to allow for the evacuation of fighters and civilians into rebel-held areas.
Сирийское правительство восстановило контроль над Восточным Алеппо.
But it's come at a devastating cost.
We have collectively failed the people of Syria.
As the 2011 uprising against the Assad regime spread through Syria, Aleppo soon became a major stronghold for the Free Syrian Army and other rebel groups. That meant the east was a regular target and became a shell of a city as all sides waged war. For the regime backed by Russia and Iran, reclaiming it has been crucial. The US, which backs the Free Syrian Army, has tried to secure a long-term ceasefire. But these attempts have been unsuccessful.
ما في عنا أي شيء من أسباب الحياة أين أنتم أنجدونا.
A partial ceasefire was announced at the end of February. Barely 2 months later, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said it documented 2,407 deaths as the Assad regime and Russian jets had resumed bombing areas south of Aleppo. By July, the cessation of hostilities collapsed. A second attempt for a partial ceasefire came into effect on September 12. 7 days later, the truce was over, after more than 400 people were killed and 1,700 wounded. But they wouldn't be the last victims of the siege. The international community has watched Aleppo burn. With little appetite from Western powers to engage directly, diplomacy has been the only answer proposed, and it's failed.
Ce qui se passe à Alep est véritablement un crime de guerre.
What can only be described as crimes against humanity taking place on a daily basis.
These things will eventually come to bite the perpetrators.
I am not optimistic about the short-term prospects in Syria.
These proclamations have come too late for Aleppo. And now that the regime is in control, has it sealed the fate of the Syrian war? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Emre Ershen, Professor of International Relations at Istanbul's Marmara University. Also from the Syrian capital, Damascus, we have Linda Tom. She's a spokeswoman with the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. From London, we have Alexander Nekrasov. He's an author and former advisor to the Kremlin. And we also have Khalid Khoja, former president of the opposition Syrian National Coalition. Thanks all of you for joining us. Khalid, let me start with you. Is this it? Is this over for you now after Aleppo has fallen?
No, for sure not. The military opposition is just one aspect of the Syrian opposition. All the revolutionary forces have been assured that the Syrian people are coming against the regime without all of their aspects. The Aleppo fighting is only one aspect of the Syrian revolution. What we have to emphasize is that the Syrian people have been splitted from their regime. Regime cannot rule Syria anymore with the Iranians beside him, with the Russian invasion in Syria and killing his own people. So the revolution will continue. Maybe we can turn back to the peaceful protest against the regime. We can face some kind of street fighting against the regime. Maybe in Idlib, in Damascus, Ghouta area is still held by military opposition. We have Daraa, we have Idlib, and we have other parts of eastern Syria. So the fight is going on, but it's for sure Aleppo is a big pain for Syrian opposition. The international community has failed the Syrian people, the Syrian revolution, but the Syrian people will continue their fight against, they have their freedom in hand.
Linda Tom, the UN humanitarian spokesman Jens Larke said it's a, quote, complete meltdown of humanity. Do you agree with your colleague?
Yes, of course. I was in Aleppo in early December, and when I was there, I saw people who had fled East Aleppo with nothing more than the clothes on their back, and they told harrowing stories of how they left, very early in the morning, in fear of their own safety and for their protection, arriving, with very limited supplies and in need of all sorts of support. They need everything. They need food. They need nutrition. They need medical care. They need, as much all types of support that they haven't been able to get when they were inside, East Aleppo. And since I've left there, since I had a chance to visit Aleppo and meet, some of the displaced people coming out, the situation has gotten much worse with, hundreds of people arriving every day at displacement sites in very, very difficult conditions.
Mm-hmm. Alexander Nekrasov, the Syrian regime sees this as a liberation of Aleppo. A lot of people would beg to differ with the regime. Is that how the Russians see it, as a liberation?
Aleppo, the liberation, it is a liberation, of course, because cutthroats calling themselves opposition, who were actually ISIS fighters, were holding the people of eastern Aleppo hostage and were bombarding practically every day the western part of Aleppo and killing civilians there. But this is like the Stalingrad of the Second World War. This is the Stalingrad of Syria. It doesn't mean the war ends. This does mean a defeat for the ISIS and their supporters, but unfortunately this support will continue. So this is just one stage of a brutal war supported from outside by the countries we all know, and let's stop talking in the strange academic terms and saying that, execution of civilians. Who has any proof of this execution?
You talk of outsiders, then why does the Syrian regime need Russia's help, Iranian militias, Iraqi Shia militias, Afghan Hazara militias, Lebanese Hezbollah, those sound very much like outside forces, don't they?
Excuse me, but you are asking a question and giving an answer in your question. If you
it's
have
a simple question. These are not
outside
Syrian
countries,
people, are they?
No, I'm answering.
Okay.
Let me answer your question.
Sure.
If you have so-called opposition supported by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and so on and on and on, how do you expect the government of this country to survive if it doesn't ask for help from outside? So that is the answer to your question, very simply.
Okay, I want to bring Emre Erşen in a moment, but first I want to get Khalid to respond to this. Khalid, that's how you have been portrayed by Alexander Nekrasov. Your response?
For sure, it's not surprising because we have the Russian intervening in Syria and occupying Syria. So this is an occupying force, killing the people, helping the regime, and supporting the Iranians on the ground. They are giving their air support in order to kill more Syrians. So it's not surprising to have this claim from an occupying force. What we are seeing on the ground, we are seeing the Shabiha forces. There is no regime at all. There is an occupying two countries, Iranians and Russians, and Shabiha forces, as well as the Hezbollah and the other Shia militias. They are killing Syrian people, not only in Aleppo, in all of the Syrian territory. We are trying to defend ourselves against those occupying forces. And unfortunately, we don't have enough support from, as Mr. Alexander said, from Saudi Arabia, nor from America. What we are seeing now, unfortunately, there's a cooperation between the Russians and Americans in order to ban arming the opposition, in order to ban the Syrian people uprising against the regime. On the other hand, we are seeing this cooperation between Russians and Americans to provide PYD forces and PKK forces and other terrorist forces to collaborate with the regime. We don't see any fight against Daesh. Last week, Daesh took over Palmyra again.
Right.
They could travel 220 kilometers from Mecca and Deir ez-Zor on the desert road without any target, without any attack from the Russians nor from the Americans. So it's obvious that both of those forces, the countries, are using this fighting against terror in order to finish the uprising in Syria.
Right. Emre Erşen, let me ask you then. You have Alexander Nekrasov saying these are foreign forces who are, propping up Daesh and terrorists, in his view. And then you have someone like Khalid saying the outside world didn't help us enough. I wonder, in your opinion, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, did they not do enough to help the people of Aleppo? Because they promised much initially.
Well, I think I can only speak in the perspective of Turkey, probably. And currently, Turkey has a hierarchy of interests and priorities in Syria, although it is very much concerned about the humanitarian dimension of the crisis in Aleppo. But last August, Turkey started a very major cross-border military operation in Syria, which is the Operation Euphrates Shield. And currently, Turkey is actually trying to take over two strategic cities from Daesh, Al-Bab, and the other one from the YPG forces, which is Manbij. And currently, Turkey is actually focused on its fight against the ISIS and the YPG. And in that picture, Aleppo unfortunately became secondary because Turkey is aware that it needs the cooperation of Russia in order to continue its Operation Euphrates Shield. Because especially during the 7 months when the Turkish-Russian relations were frozen after the Turkish forces shut down the Russian fighter jet last November, Turkey is currently actually trying to assess the picture in terms of of its realistic interests in Syria. Therefore, I think the best we can expect from Turkey currently is to at least convince Russia and Iran to maintain the ceasefire that was declared yesterday. But even that is not really very easy. We have so many actors, as you mentioned, on the ground, regional actors, non-state actors, and superpowers like the United States and Russia, and they're all trying to take something away in terms of their national interests from Syria. Unfortunately, this is the case that we see there.
Yeah, it seems to be a playground for proxy interests. Linda, Tom, I'm going to give you a quote from Mr. Vitaly Churkin, the Russian ambassador to the UN. And he said yesterday, the civilians, they can stay, they can go to safe places, they can take advantage of the humanitarian arrangements that are on the ground. Nobody is going to harm the civilians. Linda, Tom, do you believe him?
Well, I mean, our primary concern is the protection of the civilians. And, frankly, what we've seen over the last couple of months is that, we've lost focus, between, everything that has been going on, of, the people. And we know over the past couple of months that people, in Aleppo have been killed, have been injured, by military operations, and this is completely unacceptable. In addition to that, the UN has been ready, along with our humanitarian partners in Aleppo, ready to do medical evacuations of people who are sick and wounded, and because there was no agreement, between the parties, we weren't able to evacuate.
And I want to revisit something that was said a little bit earlier on. Alexander Nekrasov, you referred to the opposition as Daesh. You referred to them as ISIS. We have a member of the opposition here, Khalid Khoja. Do you sincerely believe that Khalid Khoja is a terrorist and that he's Daesh?
No, I'm not calling everybody a Daesh. I can't do that because it doesn't make sense. What I'm saying is that outside interests, outside foreign powers have been involved in the so-called revolution from practically day one. And to say now that it's a popular uprising and a civil war, that doesn't make sense. And I want to make another point about the UN. The UN has failed not just the people of Syria. They failed the people of Libya. They failed the people of Iraq. They are failing the people of Yemen. They failed in so many places.
We are hearing Ukraine?
All these propagandists of Ukraine as well. The UN is not fit for purpose. This is an organization which needs to be reformed and needs to be moved from America.
Okay, fair enough. But let's go back now to this idea of the opposition being driven by foreign interests and being terrorists. Khalid, address Mr. Nekrasov personally. Address him directly. He thinks that your revolution doesn't have validity. Address him directly.
Well, first, our validity is coming from the streets, the uprising, the people who uprised in all over Syria, asking for freedom, and we have been appointed by those people. Our opposition, biggest opposition umbrella, which is the Syrian National Coalition, is reflecting the streets, not appointed from foreign countries. We have the local administrations, we have the Kurdish National Coalition, we have the Free Syrian Army, all are represented in these opposition forces. And Mr. Alexander knows that we have visited Moscow a lot of times, more than 4 times, as the National Coalition and before the National Coalition, and we negotiated with Mr. Lavrov and with the Russians, and we have continuous talking with the Russians. So how can they are talking with the opposition which has no validity?
Doesn't that sound reasonable to you?
Well, we've heard. No, that doesn't seem reasonable to me. I'm sorry. We have some people who are in a position to the Assad regime, and we understand that and we accept that because he's not an excellent regime. We accept that. But unfortunately, a lot of people, there are groups, 700 now groups which are fighting between each other and with supposedly with Assad's regime. We have groups which have specific agendas which are funded by outside, which get arms and training from outside. These are terrorists. These need to be destroyed before Assad will negotiate with a proper opposition. That is the case. There is no point in talking about freedom, democracy, revolution on the streets. We've seen it all before. This doesn't work. This is talk. This is nonsense.
You made your point. But again, these groups are not the ones that have dropped barrel bombs, and they're not the ones with the warplanes. They're not the ones that have committed the massive destruction that we're seeing. I mean, on the video wall behind me, I've got these charred these charred buildings, these absolute hollowed out shells of Aleppo. That wasn't caused by the opposition.
We've seen barrel bombs fired by the rebels. We've seen barrel bombs fired by the rebels. There are now, yes, they can be done. It can be done.
We don't have airplanes.
They don't have planes.
You have the air cover. How come?
No. We've seen it done. We've seen it done. The bombardments are happening by the so-called rebels. They were bombarding.
Let's ask the United Nations
Western Aleppo every day.
So you made the
They were
claim.
shooting at schools. They were shooting at hospitals.
Sure. Linda Tom, has there ever been a single example of the rebels using airplanes and dropping barrel bombs?
You know, I mean, that's something that we can't comment on. But first of all, I would like to address, the comment made by my fellow panelist. I think it's preposterous to blame the UN, for, the situation in Syria. I mean, this is an incredible allegation. It's not the UN that is besieging, almost 1 million people in Syria. It's not the UN that has created this situation. It's not the UN that is blocking, trucks that are ready, in Jordan, in Turkey, who are ready to come across and deliver humanitarian assistance. This is what we've been calling for a very long time, and we are ready to deliver humanitarian assistance to people in need if parties to the conflict can come to an agreement. Point final.
Emre Erşen, are you optimistic or pessimistic that the parties can come to an agreement, or does one side have to clearly win for this to go anywhere?
The Russian army and the Assad forces seem to have the upper hand because they have Aleppo, but the opposition is also quite strong. They still have this stronghold in Idlib, for example. And I think we still have to see some major developments in the short term. For example, we talked about, we didn't really mention that, but the United States has a new administration, and Donald Trump will be coming to office officially on January 20th. And we don't really know how the United States will react to all these developments, what the United States foreign policy will be, how it will see the situation with Russia, with Syria, with Turkey. So we have so many unknowns on the ground. Therefore, I'm not really optimistic, because if you have so many actors fighting on the ground for Syria, there is no way you can reach a truce. I mean, the United Nations as well. I mean, Russia is one of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And if those states say, speak against a resolution, how can the United Nations independently create an outcome or a solution for Syria?
Okay, unfortunately we are out of time, but Emre Erşen, Khalid Khoja, Linda Tom and Alexander Nekrasov, there are a lot of unknowns. One thing that is known is that the people of Syria have faced unimaginable suffering over the past 5 years, and we hope that that ends very soon. Thank you all of you for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Okay, let's go off script for a moment. Here was US Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power. You might have seen this on your Facebook feed on Tuesday.
Are you truly incapable of shame? Is there literally nothing that can shame you? Is there no act of barbarism against civilians, no execution of a child that gets under your skin, that just creeps you out a little bit? Is there nothing you will not lie about or justify?
Powerful, powerful words, but nothing really new at the UN. One permanent member criticizing the other and doing little, while the other defends a war they're involved in, and the pendulum just swings depending on your interests. The UN Security Council was supposed to be about having checks and balances, but is it now just about checks and checkmates in a glorified speech contest? Let's take a bit of a wider look here. In October, Russia's ambassador to the UN criticized the UK, calling them out for selling billions of dollars worth of weapons to Gulf countries. Civilians are being killed by these weapons in Yemen, he said. So Vitaly Churkin this week is a bit of a punching bag for Samantha Power because of Russia's involvement in killing civilians in Syria. But back then, he had the moral high ground. Here's another example. Power sounded very different during the Gaza war of 2014. More than 1,000 Palestinian civilians were killed, and Power insisted on Israel's right to defend itself, as Russia does on Syria. Look, this is not about whether Gaza is the same as Aleppo. I don't want to get into that. But asking, are you truly incapable of shame, is relative to whether you're defending a war or criticizing a war that you don't really want to get involved in. And usually, it's precisely because they're not involved that diplomats use really tough language, almost to compensate, to tell people, hey, we want to do something, but for numerous geopolitical reasons, we can't. So here, have these tough words. If you're Syrian, if you're from Aleppo, what do you make of the talk at the UN? What does it all mean to you? Tell us what you think. I'll leave you now with these pictures from the final week of rebel-held Aleppo.